everyone, my name is Daniela and I'm a volunteer with For a Safer Space. Today's presentation is on adverse childhood experiences. I would like to begin this presentation with a land acknowledgement. I am conducting this presentation on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island. While it is important to acknowledge which land I'm on, it is equally as important to understand why we engage in a land acknowledgement. First, acknowledging the land is an act of decolonization. Decolonization is an act that aims to reverse colonialism. It is also significant in understanding history and acknowledging history, as well as showing respect for indigenous peoples and their relationship to the land. However, it is important to not only use a land acknowledgement, but to educate ourselves on historical and current issues, stand with indigenous peoples in the pursuit of social justice, and decolonize our thoughts and actions. Next, I would like to provide a content warning. This presentation details childhood adverse experiences. Topics of neglect and violence, including emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, will be discussed briefly. Today's agenda will include a brief introduction, followed by what are adverse childhood experiences, examples of ACEs, statistics, causes of ACEs, risk factors for ACEs, protective factors for ACEs, ACEs and toxic stress, impacts of ACEs on adults, preventing ACEs, coping with ACEs, supporting a client, and to conclude, resources and key takeaways will be discussed. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are negative anxiety-inducing or traumatic events that happen before someone is 18 years old. ACEs can be placed into 3 different categories, including abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. Due to the prevalence of toxic stress that occurs as a result of ACEs, adults with lived experience can be impacted in a variety of negative ways. However, there are various interventions and supports that can build resilience in the face of adversity. What are adverse childhood experiences? Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are negative anxiety-inducing or traumatic events that happen before someone is 18 years old and can result in various health risks throughout the individual's life. The 10 most common ACEs can be placed into 3 categories, including abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. These traumatic experiences often result in toxic stress. When children experience chronic toxic stress, it can result in maladaptive behaviors and physiological disruptions that will impact health over time. One study that observed ACEs and the impacts on adulthood found that the immense stress that was experienced led to an increased risk for physical, behavioral, and social issues in adulthood. Examples of ACEs. There are 10 different ACEs which we will review now. Each of these traumatic experiences that occur during childhood can result in negative physical and mental health concerns. The first ACE is physical abuse, which is any harm caused intentionally, including injuries such as bruises or fractures that are caused by physical inflictions. Additionally, there is sexual abuse, which is any sexual behavior with or sexual exploitation of a child. Another ACE is emotional abuse, which impacts and influences the mental health of a child. This can be verbally, mentally, or psychologically, with actions such as belittling, blaming, threatening, rejecting, ridiculing, isolating, restricting social interactions, not allowing the child to emotionally respond to events, or the silent treatment. Physical neglect is another ACE, which includes not providing basic needs such as food, clothing, shelter, or medical attention, or even a lack of supervision. Emotional neglect is a lack of meeting the emotional needs of a child, such as social support or mental health treatment. As well, mental illness can be another ACE that impacts a child through living with a relative that has a mental health disability, which can in some cases impact how a child is cared for or how they model behavior. Incarcerated relatives, including parents, can result in a child living with one parent, which can provide challenges for the parent responsible for the child. Additionally, this can result in trauma or problems around abandonment, along with inappropriately modeled behavior from the parent who is incarcerated. Mother being abused is another ACE. Any type of violence within a home can be traumatic. As such, seeing violence towards a caregiver can negatively impact a child. Substance use within a household can create unsafe living conditions that impact a child, such as the parent potentially not taking care of the child or other forms of abuse or violence due to substance use. And finally, divorce, while common, can sometimes negatively impact children due to verbal or physical arguing, neglect while the parents work through their relationship, or feelings of blame on the part of the child. Custody fights can also negatively impact the child's mental health, or this event could result in negative communication or coping skills. Now we will go over a few statistics to demonstrate how prevalent ACEs and their impacts are. One study found that 3 in 5 Canadian adults 45 to 85 years old had experienced ACEs. Another study found that about 62% of participants had experienced at least one ACE. Other Canadian statistics show that the prevalence of physical abuse experiences is 26%, sexual abuse is 7 to 15%, emotional abuse is 14 to 17%, intimate partner violence is 6 to 26%, parental divorce or separation is 11 to 17.6%, and poor parental mental health was 20.6%. Risk factors for ACEs. There are various risk factors for ACEs that can be broken up into 2 categories: individual and family risk factors and community risk factors. Individual and family risk factors include difficulties with caregiving of children who may have disabilities or chronic illness. Children feel distance from caregivers, resulting in them not discussing their feelings. Youth who either date or take part in sexual activity early. Little to no friends or those who are friends with others who engage in aggressive or inappropriate behaviors. Families with caregivers who experienced abuse as children. Families with young caregivers or single parents. Low income. Adults with low levels of education. High levels of parenting or economic stress. Caregivers use corporal punishment as a means of discipline. Little parental supervision. Families are distanced from other people. High conflict and maladaptive communication. And finally, families that justify violence or aggression. On the other hand, community risk factors include increased rates of violence and crime, high levels of poverty with little education and economic opportunity, high levels of unemployment, increased access to substances, little to no community involvement, minimal community activities for children and youth, unstable housing, high levels of food insecurity, and finally, increased risk of social and environmental disorder. On the other hand, there are protective factors which can be broken up into the same 2 categories: individual and family protective factors and community protective factors. Individual and family protective factors for ACEs include families that have safe, stable, and caring relationships so that children feel safe and taken care of and supported. Children have strong and positive friendships and support networks. Children succeed in school. Children have mentors and role models that care for them outside of their family. Basic needs are met, including food, shelter, and health services. Families where caregivers have at least a college degree. Caregivers have steady employment. Families have strong social support networks and relationships with others. Caregivers consistently supervise and enforce rules. Conflicts from adults are worked through peacefully. Caregivers help children work through issues. Families engage in positive activities together, and families advocate for the importance of school. Community protective factors for ACEs include communities provide access to financial assistance for families, access to medical care and mental health services, access to safe and stable housing, childcare that is safe is available, communities have high-quality preschools, communities have safe and engaging after-school activities, communities are engaged with other members, and violence is not accepted. ACEs and toxic stress. There is an evident relationship between ACEs and toxic stress. Toxic stress is actually the reason that explains how these experiences can result in biological reactions that lead to lasting impacts on adults. Toxic stress can be defined as the impact that repeated activation of the stress response has on a child, as this activation leads to changes on the developing brain, immune system, metabolic regulatory systems, and cardiovascular system. When a child experiences these events, especially with no support, it can result in excessive and long-lasting stress response, which leads to wear and tear on the body. Impacts of ACEs on adults. One study conducted on ACEs found that approximately 66% of those in the study had experienced one or more ACE, where 20% had experienced 3 or more. This study also observed what occurred to adults who experienced ACEs. The first major finding is that those who have high ACE scores had decreased physical health. This includes heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer, and strokes. This was also apparent in women who are at heightened risk for autoimmune disorders. This can be explained in part because of the impacts chronic stress has on developing brains. Another finding was that adults are evidently showing decreased mental health. What was discovered was that these experiences impact mental health similarly to physical health, where they are triggering physiological alterations in the body. For instance, this is seen through changes to the structure of the brain, such as shrinkages in areas responsible for learning and memory, decision-making, and impulse control. Depression and anxiety were also fairly common, with individuals having more challenges to recover from episodes. Anxiety was often experienced through the development of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Furthermore, it was discovered that high ACE scores lead to decreased levels of social connections and increased levels of risky behaviors. This is often attributed to the differences in brain development. As discussed, the development of impulse control and decision-making centers of the brain are altered, resulting in risky behaviors. Therefore, adults with high ACE scores are more likely to engage in unsafe activities, such as excessive substance use. Finally, adults with high ACE scores were discovered to die younger. In fact, it was found that the average lifespan was 20 years shorter. There are various reasons for this, including the increased risk for suicide, substance use, and mental health disabilities. Preventing ACEs. There are various ways to prevent ACEs, including improving the economic supports available, educate on various skills such as communication or social-emotional learning, promote social norms that go against violence, create connections between youth and adults as well as activities, and have interventions that decrease immediate and long-term harms. Coping with ACEs. As evident, ACEs can result in negative outcomes in later life. However, this is not a defined trajectory. When children have strong supports or cope, it can help to build resilience, lessening the impacts. There are several ways to do this, including providing knowledge and skills in positive parenting to caregivers, supporting a child's social and emotional well-being and health, forming close connections between adults such as caregivers or another role model, promoting health and development within communities, provide support for caregivers and families, providing a sense of purpose for the child, teach problem-solving skills or self-regulation, advocating for parental resilience, and finally forming strong social connections. Having these supports in place can assist a child in feeling more safe in the face of negative and traumatic experiences. Supporting a client. Trauma-informed care is a significant aspect of supporting any client, but especially those impacted by toxic stress and traumatic experiences. Trauma-informed care acknowledges and responds to various signs, symptoms, and risks of trauma. This involves acknowledging that trauma occurs and negatively impacts health and behavior, noticing the impacts of trauma on health and behavior, training various individuals on responding to clients with trauma-informed care, working knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, practices, and treatment, and steering away from re-traumatization through leading with non-judgment and support. The principles of trauma-informed care include creating physical and emotional safety, creating environments of trust, acknowledging signs and symptoms of trauma on physical and mental health, patient-centered evidence-based care, collaboration between the client and the practitioner throughout the process, and ensure culturally safe practices. Now we'll go over resources. The most important thing to take away from this video is that there's supports and help available. For an immediate mental health crisis, reach out to a crisis line for support. For non-immediate mental health support, a useful resource is For a Safer Space. For a Safer Space is a nonprofit that offers accessible and inclusive mental health care. Visit the website for more information if you would like to reach out for support. We will conclude this video with some key takeaways. ACEs are negative anxiety-inducing or traumatic events that happen before someone is 18 years old and can result in various health risks throughout an individual's life. ACEs can include events such as physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, physical or emotional neglect, mental illness, incarcerated relatives, mother being abused, substance use, and divorce. Statistics demonstrate the majority of the population has been exposed to at least one ACE in their childhood. Risk and protective factors for ACEs can be divided into two categories: individual and family factors and community factors. ACEs are related to toxic stress, which explains the biological processes that lead to lasting impacts for adults. Adults who experience ACEs are evident to have decreased physical health and mental health, decreased levels of social connections, higher levels of risky behaviors, and are more likely to die younger. There are various ways to prevent ACEs for children. As well, there are ways to cope for children that help to build resilience. Practitioners working with those who are or were exposed to ACEs should acknowledge the importance of trauma-informed care. That concludes this presentation on adverse childhood experiences. Thank you for watching.